upon Prime Minister here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, starting my speech. Hold up, setting timer. PI preference would be on chat. Gender pronoun would be she, her. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. When religion has run away from the responsibility of addressing and engage the climate crisis issue by saying that this is God's will, and when false messiah came, you'll be judged by your action, and the figure will judge you. And the depiction of this figure as an evil figure that is a villain. We think that when religion and the world has been continuously failed to redistribute wealth and justice for the poor, because religion is too ignorant and negligent to the chronism that exists in the world, and shove to the throat of the poor by saying that they will receive reward in the judgment day because they are vulnerable. We think that this is a misconception of where religion needs to stand in our society and communities, and we think we'd rather have a world where we have a portrayal of false messiah, where it is because of the degradation of humanity that we as a human beings contribute to ourselves. So a couple of model, right? Number one, we think that we would rather to reset a world where we prefer a world where all people understand and believe that false messiah is a metaphor of how this is because of the degradation of humanity, like climate crisis, a lot of criminals and a lot of corruption, money laundering by individuals who are too greedy and too evil to like continue their life in this world just to enrich themselves. We think we would like to have a world where religious leader emphasizes the importance to keep our humanity in place to make false messiah came. But second of all, we think that this debate needs to assume the importance of religion in our livelihood to some reasonable degree, right? Because this debate needs to compare which interpretation of meaning that we'd like to prefer. So we think that false messiah as a physical being is much worse comparative that we do not want to defend on our world. Now, going to my arguments, right? Number one, I'm going to talk about how when we talk about false messiah as a form of humanity degradation, we are going to signify some degree of control and how this is going to incentivize change of behavior by individuals that would like to witness very much. Number one, we think that metaphor that this is because of the degradation of humanity, creating that right now we have sense of control, that you have time to change your behavior, and this is going to be able to make you repair of the damages that you have done to our current world, or even in the best case scenario of opening government with have a world where individuals will be afraid to like taking all of the resources and doing bad actions for other individuals because they understand that their degradation of humanity is going to contribute to the end of the day, right? And we think that is the consequences that no human being would want to opt into. In a comparison, the world that opening opposition and closing opposition needs to defend is the world where this false messiah is portrayed as an evil being that is a villain. And this signifies that you are not going to blame other human being for all of the degradation of humanity that they have contributed to our life. We think right now what's going to happen is that the status quo that we are living in, where humans are complicit and negligent, because religion has continuously emphasized that if you do not have anything that you can do right now, even if you're poor, you're powerless, it's okay because you are going to be rewarded, right? I think what's going to happen on the world where we live in that we prefer is that when individuals are emphasized to the point that to some degree that they have degree of control and they need to do something because elsewhere they are going to be punished for that action, we think that signifies much degree of control, much degree of significance, and how this is going to rally more people to like do something for the world. I'm not going to say that this is going to create an ideal world because obviously like some elements of the world like capitalism will still exist, right? But the difference is that right now people are constantly going to be reminded that their action right now is going to directly correlate them with the punishment that they will receive at the end of the day, right? So this is going to create like bigger accountability and check and balance. Now I'm going to tell you why this specific check and balance mechanism is the only one that's going to matter, because probably opposition going to say like like, no, we still have like law and order and things like that. The difference is that on how religion have different spheres of influence to individuals, because right now in religion, especially in Abrahamic religion, we have the indoctrination of afterlife, of punishment and reward and goodness, right? This is not present in the current alternative of preventing humanity degradation. And that's why we have seen a lot of catastrophic events in the current events. Like, people do not believe in the reward and punishment scheme due to the degrading credibility of the nations and countries all around the world. So we think that religion is the most powerful tool that we can utilize in order for humanity to not fail and have more degradation than what we have seen right now. The comparison that OO and CO needs to define is the world where they are going to much prefer a world where individuals just think that it's an us versus the evil being of false messiah that's just going to wreck their life altogether. We think that as a metaphor means that you're going to be you're going to understand that this is because of your action and you contribute to that. We also think that right now is going to be a much better comparative, right? Because the religion right now is debating whether or not, like, we need to prevent the world from degrading, right? Why? Because there are a lot of interpretation of what the God's will needs to be and what God aspires human being to be. Like, for example, like women position in family and communities, and whether or not family women should be able to like lead the religion or not. Or for example, should women take up positions in society? We think this like ambiguity in the positioning of how society needs to be formulated is on how we are unable to prevent humanity from degrading, right? I'm talking about science and literal interpretation of religion. That right now, a lot of religious leaders run away from the responsibility to rally support to anti-climate crisis movement because they think that if that happens, then that might be the God's will, and that might be what false messiah aspire to have in that event, right? We think right now the difference that we are going to have on our side is that the single interpretation that when you are contributing to pollution and you are contributing to global warming, it means that you are contributing directly to this type of humanity degradation, right? So right now we are not going to see any more science versus religion discussion or debate that is very much useless and futile, given that right now we do not need that. And what we need is like for religious leaders and for religious followers to like gather hands and rally against this type of degradation. And that's why we're proud to open this debate.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the speech. Now I call upon Leader of Opposition here.
Am I audible?
Yes.
All right, if you want a POI, just unmute. Don't do it too much. Might get to you. Anyways, starting in 3, 2, 1. The Abrahamic belief of a physical false messiah isn't ideal, but comparatively far better than vindicating an entire society altogether. Opposition prefers a world that's less exclusionary and allows religious individuals to better access that religion. Before arguments, 2 pieces of setup to just clarify everything, right? First of all, is that we don't vindicate, first of all, I think Gov has the burden to vindicate society, right? Don't vindicate society as parallel to something as evil as false messiah. What Gov then has to defend is that ideologies are something as that evil and could be held up to a level as that evil and therefore needs to be abolished. That could fit in the framework of anti-religious, right? Predominantly the separation between like a lot more inclusive progressive ideology and traditional religious ideology. I'll clarify this later. But second of all, what we mean by actual being is that any physical being that could influence a mass group of people, right? Well, this is a common belief of what a false messiah is. The human beings that you blame, therefore, are not random human beings, are not random like homeless man on the side of the road that you see that you see just out of nowhere. It is oftentimes powerful individuals who can garner large masses of people. That's why oftentimes the people who are pointed to as false messiah are people like presidents or religious or like high-ranking religious leaders. A lot of times, people, the very people who has done a lot of evil themselves. When Joseph Smith, for instance, created the Mormonism or the Bible of Mormons, right? Of course, he was accused as a false messiah and creating an altogether separate religion. Except he garnered so many followers and created the Mormon Church that is now standing still 200 years later. So we question if that labeling of falsity is ever really that successful to the extent that it tears down an individual. We'd figure that it's simply a rhetoric that you place on like powerful individuals as a false messiah rather than an entire ideology and rather vindicating an entire society. Two arguments then. First of all, why religion becomes far less exclusionary ideologically, right? And second of all, how the people who choose to remain religious will be a lot more better in accessing that religion on our side. Three reasons why religion becomes less exclusionary. First of all, you're far more likely to vindicate so many people on their side of the house, on Gov's side, and because it's anyone who subscribes to any modern day humanity or modern day sort of like ideologies that are even slightly different than what the Bible emphasizes. Notice this is far less likely to happen on our side because you're inherently not placing the blame on evil ideology on everyone who might subscribe to those different ideologies. We understand as well the risks you get from our side, the possibility that there are going to be people you point to and call them the false messiah, like Christians did to Obama, for instance. The difference, though, is that this pointing is actually quite carefully targeted and pointed. Like Obama is a power figure and a president of arguably the most powerful country in the world and have done actually a lot of evil himself. There is some grounds of justification there. It's a lot more pointed and a lot more reason for religious individuals to point to them and say, yo, that guy's evil. Rather, the standard of vindicating all of society and humanity and their sins becomes a vindication of actions and holding them to as high a standards as something as evil as spreading false gospel. It becomes such a high standard of religiosity, right? Not impossible, just incredibly high that is also imposed to all of the individuals that you have to detach yourself that much to the rest of society, which means that religion would expect you to repeal yourself and cleanse yourself. More on this later. But secondly, is that a lot of victims of structural things like structural poverty or anything like that would be blamed on those people and not the structures. I know this sounds a little bit ironic that this is the effect that I'm accusing from Gov. But for instance, a lot of like cursed children, you would say that this is a punishment of your father's sin. This is a punishment of all of humanity. Structural poverty, you blame it on their past, that there was a time that they subscribed to this humanistic ideology and are now getting punished for it, right? The difference when you blame all of humanity to be evil instead of one powerful being means that you ascribe all the evils of humanity to non-religiosity, right? Which means that structural issues like poverty are likely to be ignored and there will be far more emphasis on religious rhetoric like you reap what you sow or God's wrath will punish you when you stray away from his light. The blame that you're placing on these individuals are far more detached than what is actually the root of the issue. This is incredibly dangerous, right? Because a lot of Christians nowadays actually blame the rising levels of poverty in America on like their liberalism, for instance, which is very much unrelated. Exactly why radical religious groups were able to justify things like mass genocide in a lot of other countries know things in saying it's God's hand wiping out a nation the same way he wiped out the earth in Noah's Ark because humanity is just needed a reset, right? Thirdly, then, is that you justify extreme violence like crusades, which stems from this very belief, right? The belief that the sins are collective, the idea that there is no hope for humanity and you have to wipe out everything, including their ideology and all their past sins, and you need some form of a reset in order for humanity to be good again and to shine in God's light. Second argument then is how you benefit religious individuals for those religious individuals who choose to remain religious. Four things. First is that you become constantly guilty on Gov's side because at any point you could believe that any given action or co-option of the ideology makes you the false messiah. The metaphor is that there is an inherent nature of evil that humanity is attached to. So you blame the self and is now internal to you. You end up feeling a lot of personal guilt because you yourself are to blame for being part of society and part of that false humanity. This also means that the feeling that you helped construct a false messiah or are false messiah themselves is prone to make you internalize a lot of guilt because that becomes the driver of your everyday lives. Second of all is that the ability to access your religion becomes far better on our side, especially the ability to access the virtues of your religion. There's less of an emphasis on superstitious rituals like cleansing or chanting to rid yourself as something as entrenched as humanity on our side. side, right? The metaphor mandates that you cannot change unless you detach yourself from society and this very evil of humanity, which is actually what drives even mild cases when we're not talking about something as extreme as rituals, for instance, right? It's still that Christian churches emphasize needing to go to church every week or constantly paying the tithe. You cannot link this to any tangible benefit nor anywhere in the Bible that mandates you to do this every single week or consistently, but rather the common thing that people are linking this to is that you have to become the false messiah or evil. You have to cleanse yourself or detach yourself from the false messiah or evil around you, and therefore you have to continue going to church. You have to continue paying the church. Religion to the individuals becomes a routine, a subconscious cleansing routine that disallows that individual and clouds them from accessing the full extent of the virtues taught in that religion. When you see religion just as a shield that you have to go to and a routine you need to access to avoid the evil and hell, you shy away from deeply accessing the virtues that they teach. Thirdly, is that a physical messiah is a lot more parallel to Abrahamic religion, and all people need is a sense of clarity, right? A groundedness of religion, not teachings that are oftentimes too far-reaching to access. You only get that comfort from religion if you believe that it speaks to you. It only speaks to you if it's clear. This is parallel with the actual messiah, like Jesus, right? Who was a physical being, who a lot of all subscribers of Abrahamic religion believe to be a physical humanistic being. Religious people spend their whole lives reading and rereading the four gospels to learn of Jesus's life about the one physical earthly being. To see this level of consistency from the Bible and to have that level of consistency being taught in religious circles means that there is that the false messiah is a physical being, means that there is a level of consistency that makes you resonate a lot more and gives you a lot more comfort in that religion, which leads me to my fourth and last thing, which is that religion becomes a lot more grounded because you see its physical manifestation in the real world that makes you more comforted as a human being, very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for the speech. Now I call upon Deputy Prime Minister here.
Hold on. Am I audible?
Yes.
POI preference, just unmute yourself. Just don't heckle. Like give 30 seconds interval. All right. I'll start my speech. Hold on. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think an important framework until the end of this debate would be this: how to best reconcile fragmented messaging that happens today between religious believers and religious leaders who believe in science, but also sort of believe in this literal interpretation that's kind of dumb about end of time, about the false messiah, etc. Secondly, how to prevent objectively terrible things from happening. I think it's fantastic that the opening opposition's case match up fairly with us. I'm going to talk about two things then. I'm going to respond to the vindication to many people, including those who don't believe in religion. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the benefits to the emotion of self to the religious believers, directly contesting that with just material. Firstly, when you're talking about vindication to many people who don't subscribe to the Bible, don't subscribe to the Quran or Torah, for example, I think that's very naive to the context that almost no one subscribes to literal interpretation of Bible, Quran anyway. What happens is a fragmented pick and choose of interpretation anyway. People like Reza Aslan, for example, religious scholars who use like this more interpretative methodology of the Bible and Quran. You don't, for example, believe in don't work during Sabbath or Saturday. People still work in Saturday. You don't believe in women must never, ever teach men. Right? You don't believe in if your wife is menstruating, lock them outside because it's a sign of evil, or men must never cut their hair. You don't believe in those ridiculous stuffs because I think those does not touch and those even is not believable towards the religious believers. However, there are some pick and choose in the messaging right now due to the religious leaders having so much control over the congregation, due to the believability and authority that they are perceived to have. We prefer to reset the word that they don't have as much power, or the messaging is not as fragmented as it is today. The fragmentation between those who believe in the literal interpretation of false messiah and those who don't, who believe in the degeneration, happens and are more leaning towards the conservatives and literalists for 3 reasons. One, they have the loudest voice in the room, making as if they have a certain degree of certainty, which is like somewhat needed by the religious believers. At the point when it is reset and there is a unifying messaging, I think it's no longer going to have as much impact as it used to, which means that the sense of self is also more calm because there is no multi-interpretation in that regard. Second, they have more political power. People like Pope, for example, people like the religious leaders in Islam, for example, have much more political power as opposed when they're conservatives, as opposed to a more liberal or interpretative one, a more moderate one in that sense. They have thirdly social and capital power. They are the ones who are funded by petrodollars madrasas, for example, which are very rampant, especially during the 80s and the 90s, from the petrodollar states towards especially Asian and Southeast Asian. So those means that you essentially create a better sense of self and better composure towards the people at large. We think vindication is important, especially given that the challenge that we're facing today is incredibly dangerous and objectively degenerative. What happens after people are found out to be corrupted? They said that they're hilaf, that it was unintentional, and people forgive them. There are many apologies for that. What happens on our side? People will believe that those are the people who contribute actively to the generative process of human being and humanity in general. Those are the people who actively contribute to the end of time or to the wrecking havoc of humanity, so to speak. What happens then? You take the active steps. You change them. You either stop the corruption, you report it more actively, you punish them more severely, you push for other elected officials to make better regulation, or you vote them out. Climate change, for example. People who even contribute to climate change by eating meat, while 30% of greenhouse gases is contributed by intensive rearing and the supply chain of meat production and meat distribution, I think would understand that they can take active steps as opposed to just leaving it to God's will and however God wants them to have to do in the word. The word is not just contingent on God's omnipotence, but it also depends on how you are capable to maintain the resources and you're able to maintain the situation in the word as good as possible. There are two fragmentation here. There are those who say manjada wajada, or those who fight for it will get it, or wallahu alam, right? Only God knows. These are the kind of people that we want to believe in the same messaging, in a unified messaging, as opposed to having the sort of destructive messaging that can't correspond well with the challenge of time we're facing today. Islam, Christianity, by the way, happens out of resistance towards injustice and crony capitalism in general. Crony capitalism by Kafir Quraysh, for example, for Islam, or the narrative of feeding poor by Jesus, for example, ladies and gentlemen, shows to you that even the intention of Abrahamic religion is to prevent such horrible, objectively horrible things to happen. The inequality that becomes so rampant today, 1%, the richest 4 people in Indonesia owns more than the bottom 40% of society. This is a terrible things to happen, and I think that can be prevented more when even individuals who are rich but religious in Indonesia, for example, or in US, like Bill Murray, potentially like Rupert Murdoch, can be prevented from justifying themselves by saying that it was unintentional, but rather people pushing them and telling them that it was an unjust thing to do. Talking about the better sense of self, other than that you have a more unifying message, I think it's important to understand that people are more comfortable when they know that they can do something as opposed to a randomized calculation of God and randomized time frame that is strict, that end of time is coming and false Messiah is coming. That's the reason why people like to do salat and good deed. For example, people like going to church on Sundays because those are the active steps they can take to get to heaven eventually, ladies and gentlemen. And they don't like when they are told that, well, maybe you still can go to heaven, maybe you can still go to hell despite the fact that you've done that. I don't think religious people even like that. So when we tell people that just prevent financial or economic injustices, prevent like the word or the earth from shattering, I think that's the moment when they believe that they have active steps, when they're more calm because they know what to do, as opposed to religious leaders saying that, oh, everything is in God's hand, everything is randomized, you can't like read God's minds. Well, we can with the interpretation that end of time is dependent to us, and we can take active steps for that. This is better for religious leaders, better for religious believers. For that reason, we propose.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for your speech. Now I call upon Deputy Leader Opposition. You're here.
Yeah, sorry about that. PY through the chat or turn on your video. Do not unmute, please. I will get distracted. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I don't really know what DPM was getting at, but here are 2 reasons why they're losing. Firstly, prop doesn't want religious leaders to have as much power. I just thought about this though. Leaders have less power at the moment when people are able to call out individuals and specific leaders, even if they have a lot of initial power. And so for that reason, that mechanism of skepticism on our side of the house actually reaches their conclusion significantly better. This kills the prop's resetting of the world argument. Power is concentrated on the ability to self-define evil, which exists on their side of the house. Power is questioned on our side when any human could be dangerous and could be spewing incorrections. Number 2, if there is an objective evil to humanity, there's always an objective evil to religious leaders as well. We're significantly more objective, however, and significantly more direct because it is an individual choice for action for those specific bad leaders. On proposition, blaming humanity means blaming social trends, thus grouping together anomalies in that social trend and calling every single one of them evil individuals or a manifestation of evil. Thus, we shouldn't actually help them, thus not actually like getting the benefits that PM wanted to talk about. Targeting the false messiah is a much more preferable world. 2 different questions. Number 1, why will just like these individuals be better off overall? And secondly, why religion becomes less vindictive. Firstly, why will just like these individuals who have faith basically will be better off on our side of the house? The first reason why is because you have a greater ability to access religion. Seeing problems of religion as external to the self means that you decrease the amount of manipulation that the church can do and overall gives greater access to just like that catharsis for individuals who already co-opted that ideology or who already co-opted that like religion basically, right? But secondly, you have lower degrees of internalization on our side of the house. This is true because a manifestation of religion throughout humanity means people genuinely believe they are in the wrong. We told you about real harms of cleansing, the practice of concentration camps, just like the practice of crusades, the practice of conversion therapy even. This means 2 different things. Number 1, even if prop says it might be cathartic to see the self as imperfect, we think the benefit of this is much smaller in contrast to the harms that exist. The harm is significantly lower, just like lower self-actualization on their side of the house, internal cognitive dissonance and self-blame, which leads to self-harm that is justified by the religious institution overall. But number 2, what happens on prop is a justification of punishment on earth. These punishments looks like poverty, harassment, etc. Victims suffer more on proposition as that condition is internalized. Prop's morality argument is the worst iteration of religious determinism, and that's why they lose. Let's look at the only argument they had. People do more morally good things on their side of the house. 3 things to note. Just like under this and how we flip this. Number 1, the arbitration of moral good by Abrahamic religion specifically isn't a great paradigm. People feel like the way to solve poor people or like poverty is through just like pumping of religion, basically. Conditionality of aid on the acceptance of a new religion, etc. The religious pumping is a harm that only exists on OG and CG because people assume ownership of the world, or just like these religious individuals assume ownership of the world. But number 2, religious individuals do more pro-social actions on our side of the house because they do not believe they have dominion over the world, but rather believe that we must protect the world from ways of harm. So the way they fix that are likely to be by social consensus, a good thing in contrast to by the morality of Abrahamic religion specifically. But thirdly, even if you don't buy that, we think just like these people just doing absolutely nothing is better for fixing the problems of the world. Poverty, climate change, hunger is better fixed when we do not ideologically tie it to a religion, because that would necessitate religions to compete against each other. Competition is bad because that means the priority of social help is to ideologically impose rather than help those individuals who are suffering. How do you weigh this in 2 ways? Number 1, the debate's immediate benefits have to be centralized upon religious individuals. They are most directly targeted. The maximization of their utility exists on our side of the house. We also explain larger capacity of pro-social actions, effectively flipping everything from opening government. But number 2, reconciliation of fragmented messaging isn't proven by OG. Fragmented messaging exists on their side when you align religious morality to like physical factualization. The false messiah metaphor means blaming general institutions, sometimes even the institution of science. And so for that reason, you do not reach objectivity on their side of the house. Closing government, I'll take you.
If the false messiah metaphor exists, then therefore the messiah metaphor also exists, which means good also exists in everyone. So you won't self-blame on everything, but you also appreciate yourself in everything, because messiah would also be part of the spirituality.
Yeah, but think about that for a second. Who actually thinks they are good, or who is able to access that good? The people who are able to access that good are privileged individuals and individuals who are already well off, who already had access to all those things and be able to exercise those things. So on your side of the house, to see the moral ills of the world, you are likely to say that they actually deserve that thing or actually deserve that like potential bad. But even if you don't buy that, the point here is that on your side of the house, you are likely to blame even with the existence of moral good manifesting in certain individuals. The point is you still manifest that moral bad in certain individuals as well. And so for that reason, it still creates some kind of harm. It still creates some kind of just like worsening of the vindictive nature of religion, which is my second point, actually, why religion becomes less vindictive overall on our side of the house. 3 reasons why. Number 1, the reason most simply is because on our side, you must believe that there is an external evil entity which doesn't co-opt something that people already intuitively believe. Let me explain this a bit further. People believe the world is cruel on our side of the house. It doesn't mean they will enter into religion to solve that cruelty. They can turn to their families, they can turn to other institutions. On proposition, when the manifestation of evil is a social truth, you are more likely to construct your entire worldview on this basis. A world with less buy-in to the vindictive nature of religion is a better world in order to do pro-social actions as well. But number 2, it ends up only attracting specific people on our side of the house. People who enter in would be those who purely want access to facing internal demons. The focus on co-opting religion is shifted from having to drastically change your way of life to solve your psychological harms, and instead upon other demons in your life, which you can solve in much better ways and much more objectively true ways and actually tried ways. But thirdly, even if you don't buy that, you end up achieving better methods of applying religious morality, as it is based upon misrepresentation of your religion as the moral bad, in contrast to any moral bad that is written in that book, right? So what that basically means is that on our side of the house, this is a fairer arbitration of individual morality. It's a more preferable world as it insulates the potential harms of religion. And the only thing they have arbitration towards as the harms that exist in the world are the harms that exist directly to them, in contrast to what they think they have dominion over. And so for that reason, you destroy the vindictive ability and capacity of religions on our side of the house. There are 4 clear points of weighing here. Number 1, this is important, as a prefers world debate assesses the comparative strength of social institutions. We would prefer the institution of religion to be less overwhelmingly believed in this vindictive way. So for that reason, you open up access to more effective ways of dealing with this. But number 2, religion just ends up being more harmful on proposition. Blaming the evil state of the world means blaming individuals who are failures of the state or social harms. No, thank you. Oh, already 6, I'm sorry. I.e. the necessity to steal because of structural poverty, right? The evil that is blamed on proposition exists in chunks of groups. And so for that reason, you group individuals together, which means you harm even more people who did not need to be harmed. But number 2, or 3, even if you don't buy that you can blame externalities on proposition, this is really crucial. Note that externalities are also caused by something, right? The blame of externalities upscales that oppression on proposition to dissented or dissident groups overall. So for that reason, you are more likely to otherize certain individuals on their side of the house. The people you otherize are the ones who are victims, the ones who are minorities. Fourthly, even if on our side of the house we are vindictive to some individuals, the arbitration of criminality towards certain individuals or false messiahs is a better comparative for 2 reasons. 1, it is a more fair world because for someone to be deemed a false messiah, they needed to have initial evil intent. They need to do something initially bad, and it is directly harmful to your institution. Therefore, you have the capacity to defend or to get angry at them. But number 2, it reduces even more harm. You're just vindictive to less people on our side of the house because you're only vindictive to those individuals who are intentionally doing so, in contrast to individuals who might be grouped together in that social harm. Actually, 5th point of weighing here. Better methods of dealing with internal demons exist on our side of the house. When people enter into that religion, it becomes a way to tackle things that are Abrahamic scriptures actually mandate, i.e. giving tithe, taking communion, not letting other people have control or dominion over you. Secularist iterations of dealing with internal demons like psychology, etc., are more true and tried methods, as I already explained. At the moment, when this institution doesn't provide solvency to this, people turn to better alternatives. For all these reasons, better for individuals in that religion, better for people outside of that religion, better for the possibility of harm that religion can do to other people. All those reasons, OO is passing.
Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition, for the speech. Now I call upon Member of Government. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. If I'm breaking up or anything, please just tell me through chat. For POI, you can unmute or chat. Both is fine. I'll be looking at both. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today's discussion, unfortunately, have been very confusing because it has taken for granted the bigotry and the corruption of organized Abrahamic religion today, not necessarily being grounded to the possible historical timeline of the growth and split of Abrahamic teachings, if the false Messiah to begin with is from centuries ago already a metaphor. And this has a lot of set up implications that have not been talked about. Because false Messiah is a central part of teaching, which is an important part of my POI also, because it also means that Messiah is also being framed not as the savior, single person savior, but of the good of humanity that exists in every single person. And the wider implication of this is that the religion in the world would be constructed on the basis of spirituality rather than cult of personality. Historically, these 2 kind of streams of religion already exist. When we're talking spirituality, is in Islam, Sufism, for instance, or in Christianity, the mysticism of Christianity, God is being portrayed as being manifested and very close towards each individual, that there is a manifestation of God, of angels and demons, or manifestations of the Messiah and the false Messiah within each individual. Rather, what became the interpretation that is most mainstream, exactly because of false Messiah, is the cult of personality kind of stream. What am I talking about? Is that God is very far away and is very high. That angels and demons are very far away and high and very different from us. That they are unattainable. That heavens and hell is something that's very different from us, rather than something that exists in the spiritual humanity of each and every one of us. And this is the main difference of the worlds, no thank you, that will exist in our side of the house. Because when it is already a metaphor to begin with, the main core of teachings would be that every person have a potential for good and have a potential for evil. The person as a united humanity, not of caricatures and characters, are meaningful and has a contribution towards the world. I'm going to talk about why the cult of personality is actually the root of all the problems both opening government and opening opposition have been talking about. Because cult of personality of religion have pointed to several things. The first is that there is always an enemy. There is an enemy of devil as a separate character of entity. There is the false Messiah as a separate entity. And that means that other religions, people who are kafir, people who are, not our religion, are evil people because they are exactly as opening option said, being labeled as also a manifestation of the false Messiah. Exactly because it is in the form, no thank you, of a cult of personality rather than of a spiritual one, that it is something that is shared by all humanity. This has led to things like crusades. This has led to things like, and even the disagreements between crusades, for instance, are things that are based on this characterization of elements of religion. The disagreement of whether or not Jesus is the Son of God or just a normal human being. The differentiation of whether or not God is three or God is one. This is the ability of us to try to put so much value within the iconic nature, symbolism of false Messiah and whatever, and not the spiritual nature of these metaphors of shared humanities. And I think that this means that we would have less conflict to begin with between different religions, which have been the fuel of making bigotry, which have been the fuel of making corruption and the contributions of religion. This is very important panel because all of the debate about saving the world and etc. really is a bit far-fetched because not only religion is contributing towards climate change and etc. But if you talk about religious conflict, if you talk about war, these are the stakes and the values that need to be considered the most because this is what the false Messiah has most influence upon within problems of the world. And I think that religious wars and religious conflicts and the bigotry that continues from then on would be much less likely to happen if we do not put so much emphasis on the characters of false Messiah and these symbolisms that are very misleading. But also, this is also about the corruption, right? Because why do organized Abrahamic religion become so corrupt? Because there is an attachment of cult of personality that the closer one is to God, the more religious a person is, the more they should be respected, and the more we should donate money towards them, for instance. That's why mega churches can happen. Exactly because there is a symbolism that there is a concept of Messiah, and someone can be near towards that concept of Messiah, that the concept of saints and etc. will be much more strengthened because they are being associated towards a concept of a singular Messiah and being pointed towards a particular individual or being pointed to a particular group. But the difference is now everyone really shares the same kind of potential from these kinds of teaching. And it's less likely for wealth to be then centralized towards for the sake of this holy person, but rather for the sake of the whole umat or the whole jamaat of this particular mosque or of these particular churches. This what makes religion much more inclusive. A lot of opening opposition points really talk about why then we would say that everyone is evil. We would say that the world and the false Messiah is the LGBTQ community, that the false Messiah is poor people. We don't think that's what's happened. Those things happen exactly because there is symbolization and separation of false Messiah from yourself, from your own humanity, that it is someone else, it is something separate from you. But if the teaching to begin with is already metaphorical in the sense that it is a common thread of humanity, that means that we both reflect that we all have potentials, we have all common things with other people. We might be the same with our Christian friends. We might be the same with our LGBTQ friends. And these differences does not anyway, because even though this person is an LGBTQ plus person, but I also have then sins, or whether or not even an LGBTQ plus activity is a sin or not, would be more up to discussion, because it's for a simple nature that everyone does not know everything, because everyone shares the same kind of humanity, that everyone has the potential to become Messiah, everyone has the potential of becoming a false Messiah. This is a shared burden for all of us to try to figure out in this world. That means we would not point out any blame, but we will not point out any excessive kind of praise to anyone either. So all of the problems in opening government, opening opposition really relies on this explanation of the historical chronology of how religion would actually develop. And that is the historical chronology that we would not have called a personality, but we do have the spirituality of each person being emphasized, and make sure that we all see others as a common human, and we all share the burden of saving the world together. God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Member of Government, for this speech. Now I call upon Member of Opposition here.